Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the ASEAN Web Forum on Disability Inclusion, Smart Cities, and Connectivities. This web forum is the third and will be the last forum in a series of webinars on the theme Disability Inclusion and COVID-19 Pandemic, Ensuring Accessibility, Equal Rights, and Opportunity for All. This forum is also live streamed in YouTube and ASEAN website. Before we start the meeting, we would like to gently remind all participants on two things. That in addition to the sign language interpreter who are joining with us in the forum, you could also activate your subtitle feature. If the subtitle does not appear in your screen, please click the three dots right lower corner and then choose for Show Subtitle. Participants can also adjust font size through Setting panel. We would also like to remind you that participants are requested to reflect your name in your connection ID for easy reference and identification, please. Thank you. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency Kung Fook, Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Sociocultural Community, to deliver an opening remarks. His Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ajay. Chair, Vice Chair, and representative of ASEAN sectoral bodies and entities, representative from dialogue partners, UN agencies, and other international organizations, as well as civil society organizations. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. I'm honored to have the opportunity to address all of you at the opening of the third web forum on disability inclusion, smart cities, and connectivity. This forum concludes the webinar series of disability inclusion and the COVID-19 pandemic, ensuring accessibility, equal rights, and opportunity for all, organized jointly by the ASEAN Disability Forum and General Election Network for Disability Access, together with the ASEAN Secretariat. I would like to congratulate ADF and Agenda for sustained support and commitment in organizing activities on mainstreaming the rights of persons with disability, including the implementation of the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025, mainstreaming the rights of persons with disabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN has been at the forefront in building disability inclusive communities. The ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025, mainstreaming the rights of persons with disability, serve as our robust benchmark to promote and protect the rights of persons with disability across sectors and three ASEAN community pillars. The implementation of the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan manifests the steadfast commitment in ensuring that persons with disability are not left behind. It also encourages purposive engagement of various stakeholders, especially organizations of persons with disabilities, private sector, civil society organizations, in order to realize the objective of the master plan. Adhering to the vision of inclusive community in which independence, freedoms of choice, and full and effective participation of persons with disability are fulfilled, the Enabling Master Plan has clearly articulated the importance of empowering not only persons with disability, but their family members, assistant caregivers, and communities. Despite this achievement, tremendous challenges and pressure brought about by COVID-19 have upended everyone's life. The spread of the virus has also jeopardized the care and support given to vulnerable groups, including persons with disabilities. In this regard, the adoption and implementation of the Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity, MPAC 2025, has bolstered the important contribution of ASEAN connectivity to support the regions in rebuilding and recovering together, particularly against the backdrop of COVID-19 and disability inclusiveness. The contribution of ASEAN connectivity is archived through the development of critical infrastructure, strengthening digital connectivity, and putting people at the center of all connectivity efforts. Moreover, the establishment of the ASEAN Smart City Network as a collaborative platform where cities from the 10 ASEAN member states work toward the common goal of smart and sustainable urban development is an opportunity to step up efforts and ensure the design of smart city is universal, more inclusive, and people-centered. As government work to expand service provision and build new infrastructure for smart city, universal design-based accessibility must be at the heart of their approach and actions. As we speak, precious few smart city developers are taking into account accessibility standard, which would allow persons with diverse disability to access the physical infrastructure and informations others enjoy. To illustrate, this standard can ensure smart city pavement have braille blocks, ramps are built for wheelchair user, and ticket machine and automated teller machine are equipped with audio-based communication system for visually impaired person, among others. Without a doubt, making smart city accessible to persons with disability will support growth in our economy, equality in our society, and inclusive development in ASEAN. Today, we are going to learn about how stakeholders concertedly shape best practices for regions in promoting a disability inclusive communities. There's a pressing need for a more holistic and coordinated delivery of services and infrastructure among different stakeholders to align and complement the initiative in promoting inclusive society for persons with disabilities. Therefore, I would like to encourage different stakeholders, including local government, to work together to ensure an inclusive developments in our regions. It is with trust that this forum will present us with the opportunity to further discuss policy measures as well as strategic interventions and practical support in building a resilient and inclusive region where all peoples are protected, cared for, and empowered. I surely look forward to closer synergy between connectivity, urbanization, and smart city sectors and social welfare sector to make the right real for person with disability. I wish you a successful meetings and deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for the remarks. We would like now to proceed with inviting Dr. Sita Samrit, Assistant Director, Head of Poverty Eradication and Gender Division of the ASEAN Secretariat, to deliver objectives of the forum as well as highlights from the first two forums. Dr. Sita, please.
Thank you very much, Ajeng. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and well physically and mentally. This is our third forum already, and I trust that everyone is still in very high spirit and energy as the year 2020 is coming to hopefully a happy end. So for this brief intervention of mine, I will just explain, of course, the objectives of this forum as well as the outcomes of the previous forums. So we have the presentation for the meeting. So next slide, please. Okay, so as we all know, but I will emphasize again that the overall goal of this webinar series is to raise awareness on disability inclusive analysis, approaches, and actions in responding to and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We hope that together already from the first one, the second one, and now the third forum, we will be able to identify pathways to mainstream the rights and promote the welfare of persons with disability in the context of the implementation of the Enabling Master Plan 2025. Next, please. Okay, just to make sure that everyone remembers and to ensure the continuity of our recommendations, narratives, and ways of remembering things together. For the webinar number one, there are a number of key takeaways. So we recognize that the overall challenges for persons with disabilities in the context of COVID-19, of course, is to deal with uncertainty, stress, as well as other livelihoods and health-related risks, as well as digital access. Also, we agreed on regional commitment, which is encompassing, including the commitment on health, welfare, labor, poverty, rural development, and social protection for vulnerable group. In terms of pathways and solution, the first forum we put forward the recommendation to ensure disability inclusive budgeting and sustainable financing, especially financial inclusion and access, as well as we agree that we should continue to share the best practices and innovative solutions, not just simple solutions, but innovative ones for the purpose of preparedness and long-term resilience. The first forum recognized the intersectionality of gender, children, youth, and disabilities as we move forward with addressing and tackling the issue of persons with disabilities in ASEAN. The first forum also encouraged investment in ensuring economic livelihoods while promoting leadership and engagement of persons with disabilities in decision making, as well as to continue to engage with the private sector. Next slide, please. As for webinar number 2, so the webinar number 2, as we recall, it was, the focus was on the economic integration and the engagement of the AEC in our efforts to promote the rights of persons with disability. So it was recognized then that one of the main challenges related to economic integration is to deal with barriers from the education, training, and financial inclusion point of view. Also, it was encouraged that as a region, we need to commit on the 25 key action points as stipulated in the Enabling Master Plan, as well as to acknowledge the arising opportunities in the next AEC work plans and blueprints to mainstream the issues of persons with disabilities into the work of the AEC. And naturally, pertaining to the nature of the work of the AEC, there should be a commitment and willingness to engage and leverage private sectors and CSOs in working with us. In terms of pathways and solution, we recognize that persons with disabilities are economic actors and agents with their own economic human rights, as well as we would want to see the AEC being positioned as enabler to mainstream the rights of persons with disability through efforts in advocacy, consultation, and participation. There was also a recommendation to anchor this agenda in SDG's Decade of Action, especially on inclusive economic development, decent work, and economic inequalities. I think this one is also very relevant to the third forum. One of the recommendations is for us to promote accessibility through accessible environment, infrastructure, and importantly, the attitude towards persons with disabilities. Gaps in market system development, including informal sector, should be addressed, as well as we should work together to tap the potentials of financial, digital, and data inclusion. Last but not least, again, we aim to continue to share good practices and innovative solutions, especially for adaptability and accessibility. So these are the recommendations and a quick takeaways from the first two forum. So for this one, before you get bored of all these slides from my end, for the objectives of this webinar number 3, we are very happy and encouraged by the willingness and eagerness of connectivity sector to work with us. So for this forum, we will focus on disability inclusion, smart cities, and ASEAN connectivity. So it's a very practical discussion that we will have in order to introduce disability inclusion perspectives, analysis, and if I may add, actions in ASEAN's ongoing initiatives on promoting smart cities, sustainable urbanization, and strengthening ASEAN connectivity. So with this objective in mind, I hope that we will be engaged in a very constructive and impactful conversation today. Thank you very much. I hand over the floor to the MC.
Thank you, Dr. Sita, for sharing the background and also to remind us of what have been discussed and deliberated from the previous forum, how it interlinks with today's theme, and more importantly, what are we going to discuss in today's forum. So before we move to the excited part, which is the discussion part, we would like to invite all participants to join the photo session. This is also another exciting session during this forum. So please open your video camera. Our team will help taking the pictures. We'll wait until all participants' videos appear. We're still, more people are activating their camera. Thank you very much. So we will take three pictures. I think it approximately will take around 10 to 20 seconds. So please keep your smile big during this time. Alvin, can you help uh, prepare with the photo session? I will count to three. So 1, 2, 3. Smile, please. Again, 1, 2, 3. Big smile. And the last one. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we're now moving on the one I mentioned earlier, the excited part, the discussion session. The session 1 will focus on the promotion of disability inclusion in sustainable urbanization and smart city and inclusive city. This session will discuss, among others, the current initiative on promoting sustainable urbanization and smart cities in the ASEAN region and the emerging trends at the Asia Pacific region and globally on promoting smart and inclusive city. Please allow me to invite Mr. Miguel Musmi, Senior Officer of Poverty Eradication and Gender Division, ASEAN Secretariat, will moderate the session. Miguel, over to you.
Thank you, Ajeng. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Miguel coming from ASEAN Secretariat from Jakarta. It is very heartwarming to see that all of us are still here looking at the number of participants in the Zoom room. I think we reached the maximum, no? Around 100 participants. That's very heartwarming. And we're also happy to say that we are streaming live in YouTube and in the ASEAN website. Now, before we start, we have 4 speakers in this session, and each speaker would be allotted around 5 to 7 minutes to give their presentations. The participants can share your reactions and your questions by putting your notes in the chat box. Our team will be monitoring the chat box, and also our colleagues will be monitoring the YouTube channel to get the feedback so that we can raise those questions and reactions during the discussion. So now for the first 2 speakers, our first 2 speakers will share information and insights on current initiatives on promoting sustainable urbanization and smart cities in the ASEAN region, as well as possible pathways and entry points for the implementation of the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025. So please allow me to invite our colleague in the ASEAN Secretariat from the ASEAN Connectivity Division, Director Lim Chi-chin, to share his presentation. Pat Lim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for the introduction. Good afternoon, DSG Comfolk, distinguished speakers, colleagues, and friends. It is my pleasure this afternoon to join you in the 3rd ASEAN Web Forum on Disability Inclusion, Smart Cities, and Connectivity. I'm happy to connect with the ASEAN Social Cultural Department in this particular web forum, and to share with you developments in ASEAN Smart Cities Network, or ASEAN, and the ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy, or ASUS. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The smart city is not just about putting in place digital technologies or streamlining city operations. It is about using technology and data to make better decisions and to deliver a better quality of life for our people. This is one of the reasons why the ASEAN was established by ASEAN leaders back in April 2018. The ASEAN has 26 pilot cities from all ASEAN member states. It serves as a collaborative platform to support the development of smart and sustainable cities in the region. DSG Kung Fu has earlier mentioned this, using technology as an enabler, a differentiator, and an accelerator. This mechanism will facilitate cooperation between smart city through the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of good practices, and sometimes the sharing of mistakes as well, and the development of action plans in the focus area of civic and social, health and well-being, safety and security, quality environment, built infrastructure, and industry and innovation. Next slide, please. Since its establishment, the ASEAN has grown from strength to strength. This year, under Vietnam chairmanship, the ASEAN Monitoring Evaluation Framework and the guidelines for ASEAN engagement with external partners were endorsed. The ASEAN Monitoring and Evaluation Framework provides a standardized approach to support ASEAN cities in monitoring progress in implementing smart city action plans and smart city projects. The guidelines for ASEAN engagement with external partners serve as a reference to the terms and modalities for ASEAN engagements and partnerships. The ASEAN currently has around 50 projects and 40 partnerships. We envisage these projects and partnerships will grow over time. Next slide, please. Complementing the ASEAN is the ASUS. The ASUS was developed and launched back in November 2018 to support ASEAN cities in strategic planning towards achieving sustainable urbanization while giving due consideration to their unique contexts. The ASUS prioritizes 7 priorities sub-areas and 8 priority actions for cities to focus on. The ASUS provides 2 toolkits to prioritize actions in any of these 8 areas and assist cities in developing practical actions relevant to their respective contexts. Next slide, please. Let me just briefly give you a snapshot of the 8 ASUS priority actions. As you can see in the diagram, it includes introducing and improving access to digital payment solutions to enhance financial inclusion, develop and expand affordable housing solutions, introduce digital solutions to enhance safety and security in cities, enhance solid waste management systems, introduce and improve bus rapid transit, develop and enhance traffic management systems, develop flood management systems, and develop digital skills through industry boot camps. The implementation of ASUS will require close collaboration with various city networks and our broader stakeholders in ASEAN to make it work. So the challenge now is to translate these different actions into concrete projects and also into activities that can benefit our stakeholders. Next slide, please. In order to do so, what ASEAN has done is to reach out to various partners to support cities in developing their action concepts and technical project proposals within the ASUS framework. With GIZ, ASEAN has been providing support for 8 cities in developing action concepts together with Alpha Beta Consulting. ASEAN has also engaged the UN Habitat to assist 8 cities across ASEAN to develop technical project proposals. Currently, the UN Habitat is undertaking city diagnostic exercise in the participating cities towards city technical project proposals. We continue to explore various collaboration with our partners, as well as multilateral development agencies in order to advance the ASUS as well as the ASEAN Smart City Network. Next. Before I conclude, I would like to say a few words. Smart city development must ensure that services, digital or non-digital, are accessible and inclusive, and no one is left behind. As our destination is an ASEAN community with opportunities for all. You can see from DSG Gong Fok's background earlier. Data will be key as our field. Smart cities will be our vehicles, and connectivity will be our highways. So for us to achieve this community with opportunities for all, it requires forging more collaboration among cities, as well as between our cities, partners, and broader stakeholders to strengthen delivery and be inclusive. So I look forward to good discussions with all of you in order to make smart city and connectivity more inclusive. With that, thank you very much. Back to you, Miguel.
Yeah, thank you, Pat Lim, for that very comprehensive and succinct presentation. Thank you for introducing us to 2 very important ongoing initiatives of ASEAN, the ASEAN Smart Cities Network and the ASUS, not the computer, yeah? It's the ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy. I think the one of the key takeaways is what you've mentioned, Pat Lim, on this different types of solutions, no? Digital solutions, financial solutions, and payment solutions, no? That I think are really answers and resonates with the question that we posed earlier, no? Looking at not just what ASEAN is doing, but also identifying possible pathways. And it brings us back to what DSG Kong Pok said earlier of how ASEAN is really putting people at the center, no? Of connectivity and inclusive and sustainable urban areas. No? So with those key takeaways, let's now move on to our next speaker. I'd like to invite the chair of the ASEAN Disability Forum, P.T. Lim, to share some thoughts on integrating disability inclusion principles, strategies, and approaches. So, Pat Lim, I'll hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you very much, Miguel, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this third and final webinar to discuss ways and means in which the disability community in ASEAN can be better integrated and better placed to be able to have their rights mainstream within the ASEAN community. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. When we talk about integrating disabilities inclusion principles, strategies, and approaches. Next slide, please. We must always remember that in the COVID and post-COVID landscape, people with disabilities in ASEAN, and there are about nearly 20 million persons with disabilities in the 10 ASEAN countries. People with disabilities in ASEAN, like any other marginalized groups, are profoundly affected by the emergency response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that point need not be further elaborated or labored because that is a fact. And because of all this uh, exclusion, people with disabilities in the ASEAN community have no access to five very important aspects of their daily life. Firstly, information. Secondly, sustainable livelihood. Thirdly, education. Fourthly, advocacy activities, because the whole landscape has changed. The paradigm has changed because from person to person communication and advocacy strategies, we now have to embrace a lot of social media digitization approaches, like what we've been talking about earlier in the smart cities concept. And then finally, in terms of elections, because uh, some countries, and I think even Indonesia yesterday proceeded with the regional election process, and earlier countries like Singapore and Myanmar also went ahead with elections for the general population, despite the COVID-19 pandemic's safety measures that were imposed. And persons with disabilities often, as I was told, have been excluded from such processes. Next slide, please. Next, I will talk about the five very simple, inclusive principles that I wish to share with you, and given with the time that's given to me. I think the irony of it all is that these inclusions that persons with disabilities face are not new. There have been barriers long before the COVID-19. Only the pandemic have kind of intensified these exclusions have been intensified because of the COVID-19 safety measures. And similarly, because they are not new, many of the solutions offered by people with disabilities and organizations are based on universal design principles to build back better and leave the living conditions of all, even as they specifically lower barriers faced by those with disabilities. The whole disability community in ASEAN, we hear numerous stories about how persons with disabilities have responded very positively despite the lack of access to information, despite the lack of access to education, because they learn to carve a niche for themselves, despite all the restrictions that have been placed because of the pandemic. And what they did was they went back to the old universal design principles so that they can live better and live with the restrictions. Thirdly, I think the inclusive principles that we're talking about rest very strongly on the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025. And if you recall, the 76 action points that are mentioned in that report will equip ASEAN to foster a multi-stakeholder approach to responding to and recovering from a health emergency crisis and establishing a more resilient region. In essence, the whole idea of the whole approach of the Enabling Master Plan 2025 is how we can mainstream the rights of persons with disabilities in the ASEAN community by 2025. The whole approach is a right-based approach, not a welfare or social service approach, but a rights-based, so that persons with disabilities can rightfully claim what is theirs all along. The fourth principle that I want to talk about is digitization. And this is what the whole concept of the smart cities network is all about. Because at the end of the day, we have to learn to embrace digitization now to prepare for a post-COVID-19 world. Digitization levels the playing field for persons with disabilities in communication, in how they interact with the community, and how they can access services without having to travel, minimizing the need to contact people as now the new regime requires. And I think the approach is now we should take the downtime to train, to reskill, and really to embrace digitization measures so that we can live better in the post-COVID world. Finally, the whole essence of being disability inclusive is to talk about the 3 E's. I think at the end of the day, persons with disabilities need to be engaged, they need to be enabled, and finally, they need to be empowered so that they themselves, together with their organization, together with their communities, can be enabled, can be empowered to live an inclusive lives in the community that they belong. Being disability inclusive is always sum up very nicely, as was mentioned earlier. There's nothing about us, or as mentioned, we should not leave anybody behind, because this is what disability inclusive principles are all about. And I hope that in the days ahead, in the months ahead, as the world looks towards a solution to the COVID-19 health crisis, that we will all allow and use these inclusive principles so that this world can be a better place for the less privileged, for people with disability. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak Lim, for your very comprehensive presentation on the principles that would benefit the smart cities and inclusive cities designs. No, I think it's very crucial what you pointed out, Pak Lim, that even before the pandemic hit, all of these barriers and challenges have already been being faced by persons with disabilities, and that the pandemic has intensified these barriers. And it's important that we keep that in mind. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that things are hopeless. And we see that there is an opportunity presented to us by the pandemic to ensure inclusion through the adoption of universal design principles. And we learned from the presentation that we can be guided by the 3 E's, no? Engage, enable, and empower, and also look at digitalization, no? As a key approach. And I think that brings us back to what Director Lim presented earlier when he said that the initiatives of ASEAN on promoting smart and inclusive cities and sustainable urbanization is really anchored on using technology and data to make better decisions and to ensure and promote better lives. So I think with that, we can move on to the next two speakers in session one. Uh, we're going to ask the next two speakers to share their thoughts on what are the emerging trends at the Asia Pacific region and globally on promoting smart and inclusive. So at this point, I would like to invite our friend from UNSCAP, Ms. Chai Chai, the Chief of the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion section from the Social Development Division. Ms. Chai Chai, I'll hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you, moderator. Very pleased to have this opportunity to make a presentation on behalf of ASCAP. Can we move to the next slide, please? So here's the outline of my presentation. Briefly, I will share with you some quick facts and figures on disabilities and cities, and also the key elements of disability perspectives in smart cities, along with emerging trends in promoting smart cities and smart and inclusive cities, and sharing some good practices. And finally, I will share with you ASCAP's plan in this area. Next slide, please. So based on available data, we can say that more people with functional difficulties in Asia Pacific cities in the future. We know that currently in our region, we have 4.6 billion people. And this population will reach about 5.2 billion by 2050. And over 50% of Asia Pacific's population live in cities. And this number will go up to 3.5 billion by 2050. Now, based on UN's estimate of disability prevalence, which is generally 15% of overall population, currently Asia Pacific region has about 690, almost 700 million people. And the number of persons with disabilities is on the rise due to many factors, as we know, given the trend of population aging, frequency of disasters, traffic accidents, and many other factors. And with the ratio of population of older persons currently is about 9%. But this is expected to increase to 18% by 2050. And we know more than 46%, close to half of older persons have disabilities. It is also projected in the ASEAN region that we will see significant increase in those who have any kinds of difficulties in seeing, hearing, walking, remembering, self-caring, and communication. Next slide, please. Traditionally and historically, cities have been designed to fit into a prototype. For example, the French architect Le Corbusier invented le module in an attempt to create a scale that is universally applicable to architecture. This is based on a healthy male figure, but ignore the relevance of children, female, or any other non-standard bodies. However, time has changed. Now, as mentioned in the previous slide, we need to change the ways we approach designing smart cities to respond to diverse functional needs. It is not about social welfare, but rather to enhance quality of our everyday life in an efficient and human way. While there's no agreed official definition of inclusive smart cities, but allow me to mention a few key elements of inclusive and smart cities from a disability perspective. Inclusiveness that naturally will include everybody, right? Including boys, girls, men, women, old persons, and persons with disabilities. Which means people with different degree of functional difficulties should be able to participate in all dimensions of city life on an equal basis with others. Accessibility. It means the built environment, information, ICT, services, and technological solutions available should be made available to persons with disabilities, reflecting the diversity within our community. And technology is essential because it's a very critical component of smart cities. We have to make sure it's accessible to all and avoid digital divide. I also want to mention universal design. Design, product services should be made usable by all people to the extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. This is the concept of universal design. A good example of applying this concept is that we should ensure there's no gaps between different parts of the building, inside and outside of the building, which enables the wheelchair users, those with baby strollers, with heavy luggage to move around easily and smoothly. And finally, I want to mention people-centered approach, because today is the International Human Rights Day. It's very important for us to highlight the critical aspects of human interaction, emotional intelligence, acceptance of diversity in our society. So in cities, there will be those with dementia, psychological, psychosocial disabilities, intellectual disabilities, communication among them and communication with them, might take time, but we should not consider these are somebody or those who are different from us. This should be part of our normal communication. Truly inclusive smart cities can embrace different types of human interactions. Next slide, please. So we are very encouraged to see a positive trend that has been ongoing to promote smart and inclusive cities. The trend has been reflecting the emphasis on connecting multi-stakeholders across the globe and share good practices and know-hows to create and sustain smart cities in an inclusive manner. Perhaps epitome of this trend is the initiative called Cities for All. I'm sure my colleague from UN Habitat will address more and in greater detail. But I want to mention that as a follow-up to the third global conference on housing and sustainable development, which is well known as Habitat 3, the Disability Inclusive and Accessible Urban Development Network was formulated in 2016. And following that, City for All global initiative has been advancing the implementation of universal design and accessibility in urban development through a 10-year global campaign. With cities around the world, ASCAP is one of the institutional partners of this initiative. World Enabled and many other organizations are also part of this global campaign. While this is a positive trend, let me also mention that there are currently different kinds of index measuring smart cities, but incorporation of disability perspectives into this index seems to be very little and perhaps not even visible in any of those criteria. Next slide, please. So let me briefly share some good practice examples within the larger trend. We have seen a lot of developments at different levels, national level, provincial level, city levels. One example is from India. The National Institute of Urban Affairs under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs of Government of India, in collaboration with the World Enabled, and the UK government has started to work on the development of inclusive standards, frameworks, facilitate knowledge sharing, exchange, and undertake capacity development of key local and global stakeholders. Now, considering the large number of population of India, 1.3 billion people, and based on official estimate, 2% of them are persons with disabilities, and also nearly 400 million people live in cities and urban areas in India. And the number of those who live in the cities are expected to reach 875 million people by 2050. So with these enormous very high numbers, this initiative is promised to create a great impact in the country in terms of enhancing inclusion and make the cities and urban areas accessible to all. Posters on the slides were actually created and launched just last week to raise awareness on inclusive smart cities. Next slide, please. Okay, another example from our Asia Pacific region is Melbourne. It is ranked as number 20 in the IMD Smart City ranking. So this city has done a lot of innovative work to promote meaningful participation of persons with disabilities, to generate good ideas, feasible ideas on inclusion. Its Disability Advisory Committee, together with city officials and University of Melbourne, worked to generate over 200 concrete ideas to make the city more inclusive and accessible. These ideas include the following: access to transport, awareness raising, tourism, public space, reasonable accommodation, access to information, legislation, and participation. And the accessible buildings and transport ports are guided by a set of federal and state laws and standards. With this, the city is making public transport more accessible for persons with diverse disabilities. Another idea was mentioning is the Bluetooth beacon audio cues. Users can receive audio cues via their smartphones, providing directions or real-time information about problems such as when the elevators or escalators are out of service. Next slide, please. Beyond the Asia-Pacific region, I'd like to cite an example of New York. So this city has 11% of, in terms of disability prevalence out of its population of over 8 million people. The city hosts large number of population beyond its own 8 million. Every year, there are 6 million visitors with disabilities visiting, going abroad, and also large number of people coming to the city. So in the mayor's office, they have a specific office for PWDs. It's operated since 1973 with regular staff with disabilities, with which has more than 60 actions and services for persons with disabilities, ranging from transportation, employment, financial empowerment, housing, health, accessible services, and awareness raising and education. Also, just to give you a concrete example, when we think about a taxi accessibility, you may be just thinking about a wheelchair usability. But in New York, all of the 15,000 yellow and green taxis has braille and raised lettering, equipped with an accessibility mode that includes automated trip information, large print, adjustable volume, and speed of speech, and screen reader capabilities in order to assist passengers who are blind, with low vision, or individuals with cognitive disabilities.
Yeah.
So moving to the next slide. Let me just also highlight another example, which is a partnership between civil society organization and the private sector. So G3 ICT and World Enabled, CSOs promoting ICT accessibility, working with the Microsoft Corporation, launched the Smart Cities for All Toolkit. And it is now available in 8 languages, including Japanese and Korean. The toolkit contains different tools, including steps for engaging persons with disabilities, and how to make a case for disability inclusive smart cities, implementation tips, as well as disability inclusive procurement model and policy. So moving to the next slide, this is my last slide. I just want to say that with all these excellent initiatives, examples coming from both international organizations and governments, SCAT wants to do our part to support the ongoing efforts. So our efforts will be roughly in 2 aspects. One is to promote disability inclusive smart cities through improved smart city index, research, review of disability inclusive smart city practices in the world, and identify and promote good practices through policy dialogues, and develop tools with key partners to support governments and other stakeholders in their endeavors. Also, considering the issue requires multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration, we plan to develop partnerships with key partners, including the ASEAN Smart Cities Network, World Enabled, ITU, UN Habitat, as well as the ASEAN Secretariat, to promote implementation of disability inclusive smart cities in the region as well as in the world. Finally, we look forward to working closely with all of you in promoting disability inclusive development and building back better toward more inclusive and resilient societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chai, for that presentation. Thank you for highlighting the trends in the region. in your presentation, we saw that there's an increasing prevalence of persons with disabilities who are living in the region. And more importantly, we saw the need, the urgent need to recognize the intersection, no? Between persons with disabilities who are living in urban areas, given that there is rapid urbanization. There's also a need to look at aging populations, no? Older persons who are living with disabilities, no? And also person with disabilities in the context of disasters. No? So those are things that we need to think of moving forward. And also, it's quite exciting, the examples that you shared. For example, the global campaign on Cities for All, and also those good practices from India, Australia, and New York, no? Particularly highlighting the importance of partnerships between civil society, with civil society, and with the private sector. I think that will usher us in very well in the next session, in session 2, when we talk about good practices. But before we go to that session, I would like to invite our last speaker for this session, our friend from UN Habitat, Miss Angela Mue. I hope I pronounced your name properly. The lead from the Human Rights and Social Inclusion of UN Habitat. Angela, I'll hand over the microphone to you now.
Thank you, Miguel. It is Mwai, Angela Mwai. Thank you. And Excellency, city leaders, colleagues, friends, thank you for this opportunity. I'll start with saying that today we celebrate International Human Rights Day, which is the 72nd anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the General Assembly. As we all know, this year has been unparalleled. We've grappled with COVID-19 pandemic and many, many associated issues. And for this reason, the Human Rights Day theme for 2020 relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and focuses on the need to build back better by ensuring human rights are central to recovery efforts. Today, 10th December, we have the opportunity to reaffirm the importance of human rights in rebuilding the world we want and the need for global solidarity, as well as our interconnectedness and shared humanity. Friends, disability rights are human rights. And so really it is very opportune for us to be talking about this in this third ASEAN webinar. So some statistics were given by Chai Chai, my colleague, so I won't repeat it, but we are saying that more than half of all persons living in disabilities, including older persons who inevitably will become having some form of a disability, live in cities with inaccessible transportation and public spaces, inaccessible digital infrastructure, and an overall lack of access to adequate housing, employment, health, and education. Urban environments continue to serve as barriers and exacerbate the barriers, existing barriers, to the inclusion and participation of persons with disability. Our colleague mentioned the 5 principles, and he said some of the barriers are not new. In fact, many of the barriers are not new. They are just being exacerbated by the whole COVID-19 pandemic. So what is a smart city? It's one that uses information and communication technology to enhance its livability, workability, and sustainability. And I think with ICT solutions, we can agree that we expect accessibility in urban infrastructure, transport, health, and education, and other sectors. It has to be better for everybody. A smart city must be accessible and inclusive. One of the biggest challenges to creating a more inclusive smart cities is raising the awareness of disabilities and the special needs and ICT accessibility. Innovations and technology solutions often are not designed to work for the more than 1 billion people with disabilities who have both physical and intellectual challenges around the world. It is also evident that the digital divide is growing. In fact, over the next 10 years, 60% of people living in the smart cities will have to access services such as e-payments, e-exchange, e-sharing. And it is critical that persons with disabilities left behind are not left inaccessible. Asian cities have been at the forefront of adopting smart city key performance indicators and plans with new technologies to manage services, as evidenced by new collaborations such as the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. Together with the support from the ASEAN, Australian Development Cooperation Programme, UN Habitat is working together with the ASEAN Secretariat and lead implementing body for sustainable infrastructure to accelerate implementation of the ASEAN Sustainable Urban Strategy, ASUS, in alignment with the master plan on ASEAN connectivity. And my colleague mentioned it earlier in his comments. Through this initiative with ASEAN, we are supporting several cities in developing digital solutions for safety and security. Last year in Thailand, UN Habitat was a collaborating partner for the 7th International Conference on Universal Design, while this year helping to facilitate a Smart Cities Generation Z hackathon with the Thai Association of the Blind in designing disability inclusive solutions, building on a global memorandum of understanding with the World Blind Union. In another example, in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam, UN Habitat has helped the development of public spaces which are socially inclusive and disability friendly through the Minecraft city building platform, a collaboration with Mojang and Microsoft, and we call it Block by Block. This has been a very successful innovation that we've used not only in Asia, but we've used in Arab states and other places. So I'll go to a bit of a global perspective. UN Habitat, in partnership with the cities of Amsterdam, Barcelona, and New York in 2018, launched what we call the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. This coalition has a membership of over 50 cities, and the network of cities share best practices, learn from each other's challenges and successes, and coordinate common initiatives and actions. And indeed, my colleague Chai Chai mentioned that UN Habitat has joined the Cities for All campaign, and we have engaged extensively with them actually throughout the whole of the pandemic period to have a series of training webinars that talk about disability accessibility issues. UN Habitat prioritizes integrating inclusivity and the human rights of persons with disabilities in all spheres of development. We believe in the effective implementation of the new urban agenda and see this as a driver towards the full implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, as we seek to leave no one, and indeed no place, behind. Cities need to make decisions now about how they want to develop and what means of implementation they intend to pursue towards their future objectives, how they plan, build resistance, finance, and our colleague talked about financial inclusion, and deploy smart technologies for the benefit for all. In an effort to build back better, a disability inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world, we need to see and invest in cities. Investment is so important. Cities and urban settlements as key drivers towards the inclusive implementation of the rights of people with disability. UN Habitat is fully committed to the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, which was launched by the Secretary General in 2019, to play our part in making the UN system fit for purpose and to uphold the rights of persons with disability. We strive to mainstream disability, inclusion, and accessibility in everything we do, including projects, programs, publications, communication. It's very important to make it really accessible for everybody. This is a long journey in which interagency coordination and learning and multi-stakeholder partnerships with all of persons with disabilities, such as the World Blind Union, World Enable, and this is critical at all levels of operation. So let us continue to uphold the 2030 Agenda's promise of leaving no one behind and collaborate towards the full implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Thank you, and I look forward to really listening to the rest of the contributions that will come out in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela, for your presentation. thank you for reminding us that all of the discussions, the points that are being raised now, really are anchored on human rights as we celebrate Human Rights Day today, no? And thank you for also for pointing out that as we continue with our discussion, we remind ourselves that there are a majority of us, especially persons with disabilities, who are experiencing the digital divide, and how the promotion and establishment of smart, inclusive, and sustainable cities is one key strategic way to address and to narrow this digital gap. No, also thank you for highlighting again partnership. No, specifically between UN Habitat, and ASEAN. No, and I think it circles back to what Director Lim mentioned earlier on the ASUS initiative. No, and I think as I was looking at the participants in this Zoom room, I saw that I think some of our colleagues from the cities are actually here. And I hope that they would be able to share some of their thoughts later. And maybe as one last point that we can pick up from what Angela said, no, the city's coalition for digital rights, which is I think is a global movement now, and I think there's an opportunity to connect there because
Yes.
it's a platform for sharing good practices, no, and I think Angela's last words on leaving no one behind and leaving no place behind resonates well with our discussion this afternoon. No? So I think with that, my apologies. I haven't been very strict with the time. We're going a bit over time. I'm looking at the chat box now. Let me just tell everyone that our team will send all the presentations to all the participants. So rest assured you will receive all the presentations after this web forum. And we take note of a question that was raised in the chat box. Maybe I'll just read it for now and we can circle back to it later. The question is, how can smart cities facilities be shared with persons with disabilities in remote areas? So again, the question is, how can all of these facilities, possibly improvements or developments in smart and inclusive cities, be shared or cascaded, disseminated to areas where persons with disabilities live but are quite remote, no? So I'm a bit conscious of the time. My sense is that this question might be answered in session 2 when we get the chance to look at specific good practices, no? And I think our speakers for session 1 will still be with us, so we'll have an opportunity to address that question later. So for now, please allow me to close this session by thanking all of our speakers. Thank you very much for sharing information and your insights. And now I'll pass on the microphone to our MC as we transition to session 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel, for facilitating this session. So as Miguel mentioned earlier, the second session will focus on the approaches and also good practices on promoting disability inclusion and sustainable urbanization in smart and inclusive cities. The session will focus on the share of exchange views on good practices and lesson learned in introducing, integrating, and mainstreaming disability inclusion in smart and inclusive city. So in this session, we will also have another 3 speakers that will join us. And I think I will also again invite Miguel to facilitate the discussion under this session. So Miguel, whenever you are ready. Oh, apologies. I think there's been a miscommunication. Okay, so I didn't get the note. Please please apologies for that. So for this session, the moderator is not going to be Mr. Miguel, but we will invite Jaisal. This is she's the senior officer on poverty eradication and gender deficient ASEAN Secretariat. The time allocation for this session will be half an hour. So Jaisal, over to you.
Thank you, Ajeng. I'm taking in charge of session 2 because in poverty eradication, gender division, we ensure gender balance in our tasking. So yeah, session 2 is to be moderated by me. I'm Jacel Pagio again. And as mentioned by Ajeng, we will be having the next 30 minutes for session 2. And from this session, we'll have 3 speakers to talk about the different approaches, good practices on promoting disability inclusion in sustainable urbanization and smart and inclusive cities. So without further ado, to take advantage of the time, please allow me to call on our first speaker for session 2. We will have Director from Research and Development Division, Plan Malaysia, from the Federal Department of Town and Country Planning, and he's a member of ASEAN Smart Cities Network, or the ASEAN. Please allow me to introduce TPR Dr. Alias Bin Rameli. Dr. Rameli, please take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jessel, as a moderator. So good afternoon and good day from Putrajaya, Malaysia. And thank you to ASEAN Secretariat and also to ADF for this opportunity given to Malaysia and for the Federal Department of Town and Country Planning to present briefly on the topic entitled Designing a Smart and Disability Inclusive City that aim to share the experience of Malaysia in handling the matter in the perspective of, in particular, on urban planning. So allow me to begin with a quotation about the meaning behind of disability. That is, next slide. Disability is the inability to see the ability. So from the perspective of parents who facing the situation of certain disabilities to their loved ones, their heart and their hope are different from others. They do not see the term of disability per se. If given choice, they prefer to turn the words and the pronunciation of disability to disability. So the question is, why? So part of the questions and the hope was answered by the Oliver Sacks, who states that I wish for a world that views disability, mental or physical, not as a hindrance, but as unique attributes that can be seen as powerful assets if given the right opportunities. So the real answer of disability will be in my last slide, so please wait for another 8 minutes. Thank you. Next slide, please. So let me start with the definition and the scenario. Are we really, or do you really know who are persons with disabilities? So according to Malaysian Act, so persons with disability include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers that may hinder their full and effective participation in the society. And based on the statistics, latest statistics in Malaysia, there are around 581,000 of registered PWD, people with disability, in Malaysia in 2020. represent 1.82%. And this comprise of physical, learning, vision, mental, hearing, speech, and multiple other disabilities. So, and Malaysia recognized United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, CRPD, I think in 2006. And Malaysia has ratified CRPD on 19th of July, 2010. And we are very fortunate because during the World Urban Forum, WUF 9 in 2018, we have sent a message to the world on our serious commitments on inclusion and inclusivity by forming the aerial arts such as the international sign of I love you, the international accessibility symbol, a large-scale human braille spelling out inclusion, and also the world of cities for all. So the next slide is, so other than the future development of persons with disability in Malaysia will be undertaken through the adoption of various approaches. So in addition to United Nations Convention, Malaysia also support and recognize the Incheon strategy as the regional mandate in Asia and Pacific regions to make the right real for persons with disability in the period of at least 2013 to 2022. And we also work to implement SDGs and new urban agenda for matters related to the PWDs. So the commitment from Malaysia. So other than on the left side of the slide, other than we formulate a special act in 2008 on Persons with Disability Act, we also formulate Malaysian policy for PWD that try to promote PWDs are free from any physical, social, economic, cultural, as well as attitudinal barriers. So there are 15 strategies underlined in the policy, including accessibility, education, health, employment, and also about the social support. And based on the principle and goals stipulated in the Incheon strategy, there are 10 strategic thrusts to match with the 10 goals of the Incheon strategy that highlighted that PWD has the rights and equal opportunity for full participation in the community. They deserve the same right, opportunity, and access under national law to eliminate disability discrimination and to educate and increase the social awareness among the Malaysians. There are some other examples for Malaysian commitment. Next slide. Okay. So other than this policy, we also formulate a special Malaysian standard. We also formulate a Malaysian standard, special touching about the subject of universal design in 1990, and after that revised in 2014, which set the requirements in terms of specification, quality, measurements, etc., for parking space, paths to building, ramps, building entrance, stairs, handrail, lift, and other facilities, signage, lighting, and toilet. That in total there are 35 aspects covered by the Malaysian standard. And we have also translated the standard into urban planning guidelines of universal design in 2011 and make it as a law through the amendments of uniformly bylaws, and also make the standard of compulsory conditions and requirements to be enforced by local authorities in Malaysia. So for now, and so for new developments, they have no choice. Certificate of compliance and completions only be granted by the local authority once the checklist and conditions apply or fulfilled by the developer. Next slide. So some example. Number one is on the experience for housing schemes. That's how the PWB managed this housing scheme. Our national physical planning has addressed that there must be 1% from total housing units must be allocated for PWD. And we also formulate a special guideline for housing that address the components of implementation of university design guidelines, allocation of PWD housing units. That unit shall be at the ground floor, allocation of PWD parking lots where parking lot shall be near to the PW units and must be what we call the complete with the ramps. Next, we also formulate a special planning guideline for the elderly, for the to care about the senior, and this touch about the implementation of universal design, access to public amenities, and how we can live together with the communities. Next. And about the initiative by Kuala Lumpur City Hall, there is one area in Kuala Lumpur around 100 acres, something like that. There is one development area called Brickfields, or Brickfield, we call it Kuala Lumpur, Little India, located in the midtown of KL, that was recognized as PWD friendly city. So there are many facilities for PWD exercise implemented in this area, from the monorail ramps, traffic lights with beeping sounds, touchless pedestrian crossing, PW friendly for tourist attraction in this area. That certain shopping complex surrounded in this area address on the matters of to make it friendly to the PWD, and the aim is to focus on seamless mobility towards Kuala Lumpur as inclusive and equal city. So the matters related to PWD is also addressed in public transportation terminals. Okay, our cooperation on MRT. There are many facilities provided for the disabled, from ramp access, tactile tiles, braille for the lift buttons, low counters for wheelchair users, low lift button for wheelchair users, and also disabled friendly cities. Next. And facilities also provided in new government buildings. This photo shows that there are two government buildings out of many government buildings in Kuala Lumpur and the rest of the country that address, that implement or provide facilities related to for PWDs. Next. And in commercial complex. In commercial complex, there is initiative, a privilege to the autism-friendly in certain shopping center. There is one example of Sunway Putra Mall that give privilege to the autism on laser parking, dim lights, volume down, awesome stopping, and also some assistance given to the autisms, and also some facility related to the calm room, sensory walks, and so on. Next. And also the facilities for PW also are provided in the place of worship. So to make it easy, the people to pray and get together in the place of worship. Okay. Next. Also in the tourist attractions. So KL have a special program called as River of Life in the heart of Kuala Lumpur. One of the objectives idea for transforming the river from barriers previously to the connector. So it's friendly to the PWD. And in Johor, a state in Malaysia, southern part of Malaysia near to Singapore, there is one stadium developed by the Crown Prince of Johor that has provided a special path for disabled persons at Sultan Ibrahim Stadium in Johor, the southern part of Malaysia. And if you have opportunity to go to KL Twin Tower, KLCC, so surrounded by the, I think around 100 acres. So the facilities in shopping malls, in parks, they address seriously on the provisions of the facilities for the PWD. And also some small initiative to provide a special space, say for petrol station. It's all in Putrajaya. Most of the petrol station, they provide a special lots for the PWDs to make them easy to put the petrol in their car. Okay, next. And in conclusion, generally the direction for Malaysia, in short time, I think that many initiatives implemented through the act, through the policy, through the strategic actions. There are various urban planning initiatives done by the local authorities, by the state planning and federal planning. But for me, I think Malaysia is still in preliminary stage that require more efforts to improve the requirements, and the step need more steps to ensure that we fully achieve to make it our city friendly to the PWDs. Among the efforts required is one, planning age-friendly city. We are working on this now. Also about the autism-friendly city, engagement with PWD in planning and design, enforce exhaustively the Act of PWDs in 2008, and more audit access. And probably we can call the Malaysian Standard departments who prepared the Malaysian Standard to be part of the members for the planning approval by the local authorities. So as promised, now I try to give answer about the term of disability, not disability, by storytelling the film that become the phenomenon in Malaysia entitled Ma'el Tote. Ma'el Tote is the name of the rural people. The Ma'el Tote, the movie, directed by Mr. Shami, only 25 years old. And this is the first film of Mr. Shami that's successful to collect 7 million ringgit in 30 days with a cost only 400,000 ringgit, cost only 5% of the total income. Only aired in pay TV, not in the cinema. So no beautiful famous actress, no handsome hero in this film, no choreography, no makeup artist, no audiography, no special costumes, no cinematography, no special and high-tech sound effect used in the film, even no official scripts prepared for this film. But the strength of this film is because there are 4 autistics. I mean, 4 autism. Starring the film, they have made the audience laughing, shedding tears, glaze, and ending with the happy ending. So they have succeeded to make Malaysian happy during the COVID-19 Movement Control Order, MCO, which is, I'm sure that the ordinary people, the ordinary people, the best actor, the best producer now, fail to do so. So with the tagline of "They are the same," the tagline of the film, "They are the same, we are different." So I think it's very rational, not to say to change, to understand that we can change our minds, all the people, from the term of disability to this ability. So we hope that Malaysian Film Associations can nominate this film for the ASEAN Film Awards for 2020. And last slide, in hoping not too late for me, for Malaysia, to wish happy International Day of People with Disability on 3rd December 2020. And before we end the session, please still remember disability is not disability. Thank you very much from Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rameli. I'm sure everybody in this room is interested to check out the movie, no, on Mael Today. I'm sure that when we have the time, we will readily check on that. That's a very interesting story. And again, we appreciate where Malaysian efforts are coming from, building on the right attitude, no, towards the issue that are at hand, no, about disability, emphasizing that it's really the ability, no, to see ability, and all those efforts from Malaysia is very founded, no, from this very right attitude, no, towards persons with disabilities. That's why we have seen so much efforts and initiatives already done, policy level, and very concrete, no, projects and ongoing initiatives in all aspects of life of persons with disabilities, especially for children, no, with disabilities. And your humility, no, to still recognize that despite all those efforts and investments, you're still on the infancy stage. And that's very humbling, no, and very inspiring that you're still wanting to do more. And with that, may I now give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Sawang Srisom, and he's the Chief of Inclusive Transport of Transportation for All, or T4A, to give us his views about the topic at hand. Mr. Sawang, please, you have at least 7 minutes to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jassel. Can you see my presentation? Can everyone
Yes,
see my
sir.
presentation? Okay.
Yes, sir, it's on screen.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to join the webinar and have a chance to speak about the approaches and good practices on promoting disability inclusion in sustainable urbanization and smart and inclusive cities. I personally love the title of the presentation because I'm a pragmatist. So what I'm going to present will be practical, and I think I'm sure that all of you can relate. Okay, before I jump to the main content, the first thing I want to show you is the disability statistics in Thailand. So there are two sources of disability statistics in Thailand. So the first one comes from the registration, which is updated every 3 months by the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities. As of June 2020, around 2 million persons with disabilities have registered, or 3% of the total population, and they have had a disability card. And the other source is the National Survey on Disability conducted by the National Statistics Office in 2017, and the survey reveals that we have 3.7 million persons with disabilities, or around 5.5%. So we have two numbers at the moment. Now let's get to know more about who we are. So Transportation for All, or T4A, is a network of people and organizations keen in making public transport more accessible in Thailand. And our first movement started in 1995 during the construction of the BTS SkyTrain, which was not accessible at that time. And because it's a network, so anyone can join. In the past 25 years, T4A has significantly contributed to the improved access to public transport in Thailand. So one best example is the BTS, which is our first SkyTrain system. And after the first gathering in 1995, we managed to have 5 accessible stations out of 23 in 1999. Of course, this is not practical for us. Anyway, various efforts have been made. So now we have made 22 old stations accessible, and the one left is being redesigned and will be fully accessible upon completion in a few years' time. And by the way, all new stations are accessible either practically and impractically. And T4A also has been advocating for accessible low-floor buses since 2012 or even before that. Now we have over 800 low-floor buses in Bangkok. This effort is actually what we are really proud of. So what is sustainable urbanism? There are 5 components that are essential to make our cities sustainable. So we have compactness, biophilia and biophilic cities, sustainable corridors, high performance buildings, and high performance infrastructure. But of course, out of 5 components, what can T4A do? We can actually do a small fraction of the 3rd component on sustainable corridors, and one part of it is universal accessibility, which contributes to the sustainable cities. And again, T4A, we are now contributing to the inclusive transport. What we have done so far to make our public transport more accessible. So we gather from time to time for social awareness. I try to avoid using the word demonstration. So the gathering for here is actually demonstration. And we also provide inputs to enhance laws and accessibility code, either domestic or international laws. We influence governments and local authorities. We build networks, we collect data and analyze it. Sometimes we bring someone to the court because they are too stubborn to make changes. So sometimes it is necessary. We also address our issues in the media. We also build capacity for our team. So one thing we are trying to do is present data on inclusive transport in a more easy to understand manner. So one effort is the practicality score. In the picture, you can see the current 5 train lines in Bangkok and their stations in green, blue, and red. Green means you can enter on either side, inbound or outbound. Blue means you can enter on every exit. And red means you can use only one exit, which is considered not practical. So now we have 115 stations and 61% are practical. So we just don't say that our public transport is accessible or not, but we also measure how accessible our public transport is. And this simple evidence is beneficial in our influencing. And as you know, data and evidence are key to influence and for both service providers and regulators. Apart from the practicality score, we are also developing what we call Public Transport Accessibility Index, or PTI, with Mayday, which is a group of young people keen in public transport development. So this is a pilot project we did in all 14 provinces in southern Thailand. We covered train stations, piers, bus terminals, and airports. The full score is 5, and as you can see, the average of the south is less than 1, so which means most of them are not accessible. So that means a lot needs to be done in the south. And now I'd like to show you some of the barriers that we still need to improve. So as you can see in this picture, out of 4 exits, there is only 1 accessible exit. And the problem is crossing the road in Bangkok for wheelchair users is almost impossible. And remember, when we talk about accessible transport, we must ensure maximal and practical access. So this one is not practical at all. And this is also another similar problem. And there are several stations either on or under intersections. And this means we must make all exits accessible, not just some. And this one is not accessible, or it's not practical. And you can also see stair lifts in a few stations in Bangkok. This equipment is quite unsafe and it's time consuming. So we recommend not to use it in public transport if possible, try to avoid it. And a few stations also have their elevators locked. And that means you have to wait for staff to come and assist you. And one reason is the old design, which allows the elevator to go straight up to the platform. So that's why they have to lock it. But anyway, we are now trying to fix this problem, and there will be hopefully there will be no more locking in a few years' time. Okay, and one big problem is the pedestrian systems, of course. If you've been to Bangkok, you should see how unusable our sidewalks are. Without accessible sidewalks, people with disabilities cannot use public transport efficiently. as you know it. Okay, despite the problems I've just talked about, but anyway, we have witnessed some changes. So we have more accessible exits. Universal accessibility is part of transport and urban development policies and the government's projects. We also see improved pedestrian systems. We see more visibility of people with disabilities who use public places and going to works, etc. And we have more options of accessible city transport like train, buses, a ferry. We have more understanding. People realize themselves that universal accessibility benefits all, not just people with disabilities themselves. We also need some indicators to prove that what we are doing has positive impacts on people with disabilities. One indicator is the traveling costs. This is my own example because we have not had any research on this. So 10 years ago, I spent around $300 to $400 per month for transport services. But now with improved access and increased coverage, the costs have decreased to only $30 to $40 per month. And if you have a disability card, you can have a free ride. And as a result of our non-stop advocacy, our future public transport will be more and more accessible. One example is the BTA's Wat Prasi, which will be completed in 2021. As you can see in the picture, there are 8 exits and all of them are accessible. Unbelievable. I can't imagine that we can have this in Thailand. In the past, even asking for one elevator is already very difficult. And our next step is to make urban areas more accessible, especially the pedestrian systems. Now, T4A has been involved in at least 3 projects initiated by Bangkok. In Ratchada Pisek, we proposed to build a sky park, which will solve the problem of the underground train in that area, which is not fully accessible. In the meeting, we proposed this. And from that meeting, Bangkok has invited us to join the other projects in Chongnonsi and Ratanakosin, where the Grand Palace is. And other areas in Bangkok have also been identified, and we'll make sure that we are involved in all of the projects they have. And before I end the presentation, I'd like to leave with you some recommendations which might be useful, I hope. So the first one is we have to make sure the involvement of organization of persons with disabilities in urban development projects from the beginning, not later stages. So we have to be involved at the start, and we have to always start small to ensure quality. So don't aim to make the whole city accessible, but one manageable area. So stop romanticizing things. It doesn't work that way. And this is another one is what I'm thinking of is the platforms for those or for people and organizations who have the same interest in for example, inclusive transport, accessibility, urban development, together share and learn from each other. And right now, there are limited platforms like this for us. In the past, I remember that the UN had what we call the non-handicapping environment, which was a platform for us, to gather, to share and learn from each other, but it's no more. So in the future, I think we should bring it back. And also in terms of policy, we need policy in place. We have to ensure the implementation and also the monitoring. Okay, I'm gonna leave with this last slide. So if our city's infrastructure and facilities are not designed for all, I think you know how those excluded might feel. So this is all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Jasel.
Thank you, Mr. Sawang. Again, you added inspiration for session 2 from the sharing of Malaysia, now from the inputs of Thailand, how we are getting strong in terms of the mobility, for persons with disability, with all these improvements in the transport systems. These are very simple initiatives, but I'm sure this has created much convenience, for many persons with disabilities in your country, because this is really a day-to-day, challenges for them.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
And we can really resonate how difficult it was, for persons with disability. And congratulations, after 20 years you have gone a long way, and your recommendations are very strong as well in terms of involvement of the persons groups, and challenging the policies in place towards implementation, and really monitoring, because evidences is really very important to influence inclusivity, for persons with disabilities. So thank you again, Mr. Sawang. And our last speaker, but definitely not the least, we will now give the floor to Agenda. We have Mr. Tolhas Damanik from General Election Network for Disability Access. Mr. Tolhas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessel. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are very pleased to be here together with you to discuss our daily situation right now. Before I start with this presentation, I think just very important for us to think about our cities, our city where we live, whether this city is already accessible, or this city already inclusive, bring us to a comfortable and safe life. Yeah, this is actually our dream, because all of us agree that being live in a smart and inclusive city is very enjoyable for everyone, including person with disability. First slide, please. But when we talk about accessibility, because many times the word accessibility already mentioned by our previous speakers, and now this is actually the time for me just to bring all of us to really a very basic concept about what is accessibility. And the first slide, actually, I would like to highlight why accessibility is very important. From the previous speakers, we already know that there is a lot of obstacles still in the environment. And thanks to Bapak from Malaysia that already bring the definition or the concept of disability, because disability is not really talking about the person itself, but rather to look at the relation between the impairment in one side, but also the barrier in the society or the environment that hinder the participation of person with disability. And indeed, the barrier still exists even in our city right now. And if we look at the word discrimination that almost mentioned any time when we talk about disability, something that I would like to mention, if we talk about discrimination, the discrimination itself is not only because of maybe someone do something bad for a person with disability, but our inability to provide accessibility is also considered as discrimination for a person with disability. Why? Because without accessibility, it can be guaranteed that person with disability will be neglected from the society. Taking the example of a wheelchair user, for example, if he or she want to enter the room, but the entrance there is a stair out there. So how he and she can enter the room with his or her wheelchair? Next slide, please. So what is accessibility? We already heard several times. Accessibility is something that really ensure that a person with disability can function within their environment. This is very true, because when we talk about the smart city, for example, look at the key of the smart city, which is the use of the technology. Yeah, it is true that technology is really helpful. It can be a solution for every problem that we have in our city. But the question is that whether the technology itself is accessible for person with disability. For example, if we have the website in the city that really not accessible for person with blind, for example, how we can ensure that person with blind can also get access, have the information from the website if it is not accessible for them. So it is important to think about whether all aspects in our city development already consider the accessibility for all. Next slide, please. So why accessibility is very important and inclusivity of the city is very important in ASEAN? I think we already agree that now with the increase of the population, many people tend to live in the city, including person with disability. Yeah, for this one, I think data is very crucial to understand how many person with disability lives in the city right now. Second, the fact that many cities, or even the majority of the city, has been built a long time ago without considering accessibility. It is very realistic because maybe the policymaker, they don't really understand about accessibility and the inclusivity in the beginning. But since the 90 era, 2000, I think we start talking about inclusivity and accessibility and person with disability. The fact that with the non-inclusive planning and development, so many public facilities, information technology, even school is not really accessible. So if you look at our city, maybe just take example, several city like in our country, in Jakarta, not many city already consider as a inclusive city. Even for tourism, for example, if we think about whether people with disability can go to tourism places or even the museum or public facilities, they still have a problem to enjoy that places because there is no accessibility feature available in that place. Next slide, please. Look at the trend because of the UN CRPD convention already in 2007. It is also mandated that all state party to think about how to make environment really accessible, because without that, person with disability cannot participate and cannot live independently. So people with disability cannot live independently, not just because of their environment, but not just because of their disability or their impairment, but rather look at their environment itself, whether it is accessible for them just to enjoy and to participate. Next slide, please. So yeah, our previous speakers also already mentioned several aspects or several things that needs to be ensured that it is accessible. For example, the road, the building, public facilities, hospital, even the schools. So because many children with disability cannot go to school, for example, because their school is not are not accessible. So even for emergency services, it is also important to check whether it is accessible. For example, how people with deaf understand that, okay, it is easy for us just because we can hear the sound from the alarm. But how about our friends who are deaf? How the accessibility feature can accommodate their need of getting the information about the emergency system. Next slide, please. taking some information from the ASEAN Smart City Network, I think this is we really sure that even the ASEAN Smart City Network is really committed with the term inclusivity to ensure that the human rights and the fundamental freedom is really considered during the project. And also the ASEAN Smart City Network will be contribute to the achievement of the Inclusive ASEAN 2025. Next slide, please. Our DSG in the beginning of this webinar already talked about the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025 that also include action point related to what we discussed right now. So if we look at the action point AEC 11, which is talking about the accessible transportation. So it is important just for us to look at our transportation. Mr. Sawang already give us example how Thailand already implement the accessible and inclusive transportation. Next slide, please. So AEC 12, this is really relevant with what we discussed this afternoon. The commitment for ASEAN to develop the smart city project that has to be inclusive for also person, including person with disability. Next slide, please. And also AEC 16 that talk about the accessible tourism. Why it is important? Because person with disability also have the right to travel around even around the ASEAN countries. So it is important that when we talk about the smart city, and the question is how accessible or inclusive our cities in ASEAN. So people with all kind of backgrounds, including person with disability, can enjoy that city. Next slide, please. This is kind of recommendation that I would like to raise right now. I think, cooperation among a smart city network is very important to ensure that all cities will be inclusive in the future. I think by sharing good practice and lesson learned on how to develop the smart city to become more inclusive is very crucial and important right now. So ASEAN will achieve the common understanding about what inclusivity of the city look like. The second recommendation is about the guideline. I really heard from Mr. Lim that the guideline is already available for the smart city network, but we need to check whether this guideline also accommodate the need of a person with disability. The third one, I think this is already mentioned also by Mr. Sawang, that it is important to involve organization of person with disability or person with disability in the planning or implementation or evaluation of the smart city project, so we can understand how the project itself already accommodate the need of person with disability and ensure the inclusivity. The concept of accessibility and universal design, we also heard from our colleague from UNESCAP and UN Habitat on how the concept of accessibility and universal design it's very important to ensure the inclusivity of our plan or project. When we talk about accessibility for person with disability, I think we need to come up with a new approach, which is universal design. So, because what Mr. Sawang mentioned in the beginning, if we do something for person with disability, it doesn't mean that it is only benefit for person with disability, but it has to be for all. And yeah. I think that's a last part from me. Thank you very much. And I will back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolhas. That was very short but succinct sharing of your views, no? Emphasizing again that, well, smart cities is really a city that is enjoyed by everybody, by all, no? Not just for persons with disabilities, and reminding us that to discriminate, no, persons with disabilities is not just to discriminate face-to-face or have direct engagement with the person with disability, but actually when we're doing nothing, no, in terms of increasing access of persons with disabilities in all aspects of life, is really we're part of this discriminating society. And we recognize, no, your recommendations on how we push forward, emphasizing again the importance of the network, of the role of the network, and the use of the universal design. But we have to revisit also ensuring that it's really friendly to our persons with disabilities needs. And that, again, emphasizing that accessibility is not just about transportation, it's not just about having a friendly shopping malls, but it is really more of all aspects of life. Even the emergency alarming systems, even our helplines. Probably we have to take a look at that, no? How helplines are being accessible to children who are in need of protection, no, from any abuse, because our helplines, most of them, no, are not friendly actually to persons with disabilities. So with that, we are running out of time, but we can at least have 2 or 3 more minutes, probably, just to go back to the earlier question posed about how we really cascade, no, or share these initiatives to the rural areas and remote areas as well, because we also have people, no, in need of all these services and initiatives in their respective communities. So maybe anyone from our speaker would want to address that early question from our chat box. Maybe Mr. Tolhas, would you want to address that query or question? How we ensure that
I think for now, as far as I know, that ASEAN also have the project what we call as inclusive village, if I am not mistaken. So because we also look at the modality that a village have in terms of making their villages more inclusive for person with disability. So I think what the strategy we can use for this one is to introduce the concept of the smart city and introduce the good practice, so people in the rural area or in the village can consider something that they can do based on the situation in their own, on how to first involve person with disability in the decision-making process on the planning stage or even for the implementation. Because I think if we talk about inclusive cities, inclusive smart city, it also impact the life of people in the rural area, even though maybe we need to think about the time, because in the village we realize sometimes they have a limitation, including, for example, access to internet and so on. But I think by having that ideas of creating inclusive and smart city, I think people in the rural area can also implement that principle or concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolhas. And I've seen in the chat box that UN Women, we have a friend from UN Women who would want to share their views. May we have from UN Women, Mr. Rice, please take the floor.
Oh, thank you so much. I thought we were running out of time, so I was just started to put in the chat box on some of the thoughts that we have. I'm very glad to hear very much the presentation of all the panel speaker, and particularly in the last one. Really appreciate the fact that you mentioned about accessibility is very much closely linked to the issues of discrimination, because many times when we're talking about smart cities, there's a lot of focus around technology, connectivity, all the fancy urbanization and urban development without actually consider one of the most fundamental importance of smart city is about safety, right? It's about the fact that safety is to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity, choice, and empowerment. And therefore, accessibility is not just about physical accessibility, but it is really about how do you address the larger underlying issue that prevent accessibility, and that's around discrimination, around issues of legal framework. Legal framework is also important to provide enabling environment. And when we're talking about physical infrastructure, it's not just about transportation. There's 3 types of infrastructure that we generally have to look at, and all of them are creating different kind of opportunities, safety, and security for everyone in the society, right? Number 1 is economic and retail infrastructure, like the trading center, marketplace, manufacturing, economic zone. That is a kind of like the marketplace where it's actually a job creation for both men and women. Is it safe? Is it accessible for everyone? Or even women with disability. So we're talking about intersectionality as well, right? Of discrimination between gender and disability. And as you know, in many of our ASEAN cities, women of disabilities are probably one of the most marginalized of all, if not, because they're also facing with sexual and physical harassment in the environments that they are actually going into the city. So I think equally important is to talk about the legal framework that address safe public space for women and girls. There's a saying that if the street is walkable for women and girls, it is safe for everyone. If it's safe for women and girls, it's safe for everyone in the city. So there's also a discussion also about addressing awareness raising and education, teaching about sexual and reproductive health education, promote gender equality norm, and awareness raising around sexual violence and violence against women in school, in cities, in the place where people are actually taking in order to go to school, for instance, to deal with sexual harassment and sexual violence against women. So there's a whole issues around changing attitude and social behavior. And that is something that UN Women has been doing in a lot of ASEAN capital cities, in Jakarta, in Hanoi, in Manila, in Quezon City. We're doing a lot of work in these areas to actually talking about how to make this city safe and inclusive for all. And last but not least, I'd like to put forth the recommendation that because it's not one sector kind of focus, right? It's really at the end of the day when it goes down to the local level, whether it's urban or rural, it's really a lot about coordination mechanism among different stakeholders at the local level, from police to health departments to city builder, and how to engage all these multi-stakeholders to create and listen to each other perspective. Because like I said, you know, like hearing from the disability perspectives is different from women, and women with disability are also having another different perspective compared to people who have certain kind of privilege where they are in the society, and they might not think about these issues because they don't have to face them on a daily basis. So consultation mechanism is important as well. So when we build infrastructure, how do we mainstream gender into every single process of infrastructure design to implementation to monitoring and implementation, not just procuring, not just at the end of the step, right? So how do we create that kind of hearing that actually inclusive for everyone? So thanks for the opportunities for making the intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rice. Thank you, Rice. Those are very insightful and very important interventions on the part of UN Women. And again, I think the session just again reinforced our common belief and our common principle in terms of our goals in achieving inclusive smart cities for everybody. And that's very clear from our discussions that it's not all about you know, that smart cities is really about people, no? And the center is really the people, no, at the center of this agenda that includes social sustainability as well, and not just infrastructures, technology, and everything. Ensuring accessibility, safety, and security for everybody, especially persons with disabilities. And to that, please allow me to close this session too. We've consumed so much time for this, but I'm sure you've been glad not to have this discussion. And thank you for all your active participation in the chat box and for all our speakers. I now turn over the floor to our MC, Ajeng, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason, for facilitating the discussion and exchange of views in session 2. And also to walk us through the good practices and lesson learned shared by our speakers and also participants. Before going to the last session of this forum, we would like to inform you that the presentation from this forum is available through Google Drive, and the link to the shared folder has been shared with you through chat box. So you may wish to check your chat box to get access to the link. With that, we will now invite once again Dr. Sita Samrit to share the synthesis and recommendation from today's discussion. Dr. Sita, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ajeng. As usual, we have a one-page presentation to, well, hopefully to summarize very rich discussion that we have today. Of course, there are more details to beyond just this one page, but we hope that this one page captures at least the key point. So next slide, please. So again, when it comes to overall challenges, I think now that we are at the third forum, it's reaffirmed, but of course reaffirmed so that we can think about solutions together, that all existing barriers are intensified by COVID-19 pandemic, especially digital divide. I think this features very prominently in the discussion today, as well as economic livelihoods, and the ever more constrained mobility. I think mobility is again is a recurring theme for the discussion today. Mobility, accessibility, and connectivity. And I think all the speakers emphasize the same thing, that connectivity or accessibility or mobility are not just about physical issues, but also about the digital spaces, as well as I think the UN Women colleague also emphasized that it's also about the attitude on how we look at what we mean by accessibility. In terms of regional commitment, of course, we took this part from the presentation of Pat Lim from ADF, because this resonates perfectly with the enabling master plan, that for us, after the 2 web forums and now the last one for this year, we need to engage, enable, and empower using the people-centered approach. And what we need is not just the discourse or the narrative or the policies on paper, but we need also with sustained investment. In terms of the pathways and solutions, it is recommended that we will promote and mainstream universal design. I think this is practical, visible, and palpable aspect of the discussion today, and disability perspectives in smart cities and sustainable urbanization. Also, there's a pressing need to promote more data. I think the speaker from Thailand has underscored that data is very important for us, as well as the research and capacity building in order to implement effectively disability inclusive smart cities, including public transport. We also must continue to forge more collaboration among cities as well as between our cities, partners, and stakeholders to enhance digitalization for all. As Pato has mentioned, digitalization itself is not solutions for all. There are many layers and nuances to how we can make digitalization inclusive for persons with disabilities in all locations, not just in the urban setting. Also, we will strive to strengthen professionalization of human assistant products and services for the city. So again, this is a pragmatic aspect of the recommendations today. As I think a number of speakers have given us concrete examples of how in practicality, services, products, infrastructure must be up to the standard to be able to respond to the needs of the persons with disabilities. Last two recommendations that we are able to capture from the discussion today is for all stakeholders to create, or at least to think together on how to establish supportive financing frameworks. Again, even if we want to say directly or not, it's also about money, resources, and to be able to finance all the solutions and all these recommendations that we put forward. This can be done through the engagement of the private sector. Last but not least, we will continue to foster M&E through access audits. And I would like to again add the point from our colleagues from UN Women on the importance of safety and to also address discrimination, which is a more social part, but it's also the economic part and the physical infrastructure part of what we mean by accessibility, as well as inclusive cities, infrastructure, and transport. So that is the end of the synthesis from the ASEAN Secretariat today. And I will hand over the floor back to our beloved Ajeng. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sita. Ladies and gentlemen, the presentation of Dr. Sita Samrid conclude our event today. We would like to once again extend our appreciation to the speakers and participants for your active participation and discussion. It's also very encouraging to learn that we have a big range of participants joining us today through both Zoom and YouTube channels. So again, thank you very much for your participation, and we hope to see you in another event. Goodbye and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Ajeng. Thank you, Dr. Sita.
Thank you from Malaysia.
Thank you, Bapak from Malaysia.
Thank you. I'm from Myanmar.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm from Myanmar.
Thank you from Deepa, Thailand. Thank you.
From Shamina Foundation, Myanmar.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you from Laos.
From Laos, yes. I think we have been met with once in Thailand.
From National Vocational Rehabilitation Center.
Yeah, you're sure. Nice to meet with you, yeah.